Please give a warm round of applause from the class of 1974, Peter Finney, Jr.
Thank you, Leo, very much. You know, I don't understand, Mr. Kearney, and you said exams are next week. Father Frank said everybody's exempt, so we will see about that. But I always say, there was a mayor of New Orleans, Vic Skiro. He always liked to say when a hurricane was coming, don't believe any false rumors unless you hear them from me. So don't believe that. It's really hard for me to believe that it's been 44 years, you know, since I graduated from Jesuit. I'm a member of the class of 74, and that's the year the NFL moved the goalpost back to the end line. So if you can imagine, they used to throw passes and they would hit the goalpost, if you can believe that. That was also the year Richard Nixon was the first U.S. president who was forced to resign from office. When I came to Jesuit in 1969, I think I was about 4'11", okay? I was so tiny that some of my buddies thought they'd have some fun one afternoon after school. And so they decided to see if they could stuff me in one of those half lockers. And amazingly enough, I fit, okay? That was the day I learned how important the value of a sense of humor is. As Leo mentioned, my dad graduated from Jesuit in '45. My dad's dad graduated in 1909. My brothers Tim and Michael graduated in '77 and '85. My two sons graduated in 2002 and 2006. And so it's been very simply, Jesuit High School has really shaped all of our lives. I come from a family of storytellers. My life was really shaped by reading and by my Jesuit education. My dad worked for 68 years as a sports writer in New Orleans. We estimate he wrote 15,000 columns, which added up to about 12 million words over the course of his career. The amazing thing is he could get a point across in a story in 2 or 3 words that it would take others maybe 100 words to do. He always would tell me and my 5 brothers and sisters, get to the verb quickly, say it simply. And of course my dad, he covered the saints for 40 years, 40 long, terrible first years. It's almost like wandering in the desert for 40 years, And so they were so bad when my dad was covering them in the final season under Mike Ditka that he was fired. And my dad knew from the beginning that Ditka's heart was really not into being the head coach of the Saints. Maybe your dad has told you the story how about in 1999, Ditka traded the entire Saints draft for one player, for Ricky Williams. Plus he gave up the first-round pick in 2000 for Ricky Williams. He just wanted to go play golf at the end of the day. And so he went out and played golf. So when Ditka was finally fired after 3 really messy seasons, my dad summed it up like this. Mike Ditka spent the last 3 years double parked in New Orleans. Hey, my dad couldn't beat your dad up, but he could out-metaphor your dad, okay? I think Jesuit taught us all structure and how to write. And if you could see some of the emails I receive on a regular basis, I think you'd realize, English sometimes is considered a second language. I mean, it's incredible to see some of the things we get. So I want to impress upon you, you don't realize it now, but when you get to college, even if you struggled in English, you're going to be so far ahead of everybody else in that college. So the idea is you take that as a point of pride. You graduated with some really great preparation, but don't take those gifts for granted. If you see somebody struggling in class in college, reach out to them and offer them a Blue Jay hand. Really be a man for others. Father Harry Thompson was a man for others. Father Harry was the president of Jesuit High School in the 1980s, and he made sure that every student understood the transformative power of service in the name of Jesus. So when the Thanksgiving baskets were ready to be delivered each year, he went with the students to the families' homes to deliver those baskets. And it wasn't just the idea of service. He got the students to reflect on why they were doing this. It wasn't just a feel-good thing. They were doing this because they were compelled by their faith in Christ to serve others. he always used to ask the students after they had returned from giving out the baskets, were you scared? You know, were you concerned about going into the apartments and giving out the baskets? And one student actually told him, yeah, Father, I really was a little bit scared at first, but after we dropped the food off at several apartments, all I saw was a bunch of kids who didn't have a lot to eat. So it was that personal connection that Father Harry brought with students to understand the real tough things about poverty. Father Thompson knew the value of money. One year in 1995, there was a massive thunderstorm in New Orleans, and surprisingly enough, it flooded the streets. I called him. He was at the Immaculate Conception Church on Baronne Street, so I called him at the rectory to get a damage assessment. It took him a while to get to the phone, and he said, when he finally picked up, he said, "Man, Pete, I'm sorry. I was in the kitchen drying out the cash from the collection in the microwave." So anybody who knows Father Thompson can appreciate that story. He was the king of the short homily. And if you listen to Pope Francis talk these days, I guess it's a Jesuit thing. Usually the structure goes like this. I'm going to tell you three things, and boom, 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 and that's it. And you get to sit down. Father Thompson, he was a guy who knew how to get to the verb. One homily I'll always remember him talking about. It was on the word calumny. Okay, now calumny is one of those $1,000 words. It means defamation, slander, character assassination. And if you listen to political discourse today, there's a whole lot of calumny going on. But Father Harry's point was this: each of us as Blue Jays bear a responsibility to be what he called a but person. And he wasn't talking about the human anatomy. He said, how refreshing would it be if you were involved in a conversation with another person and for something, and the guy that you're talking to is tearing to shreds another person for doing something, like for being late for a job or whatever. And Father Thompson said, what I want you to do is to say, but do you know that this guy, he's moonlighting a second job, he's dead tired, and he's doing this to send his kids to school. Always be that but person. We need to cut the calumny chain by defending and honoring the absent. That was Father Thompson's, how refreshing would that be today in our society. The other hidden message in that is absolutely no one knows with 100% clarity what's going on in another person's life. Maybe your friend's parents are getting divorced. Maybe your dad has lost his job. Maybe there's a death or illness in the family. Our responsibility is to be the but persons and lift people up, not tear them down. One case in point for me would illustrate this. One of my best friends at Jesuit was Stephen McKenna. We went to St. Leo the Great School together, elementary school. He was one of the first African-American students to go both to St. Leo and to Jesuit. Stephen was an incredible student. He was a really gifted singer, and he was a great athlete. We both went to Jesuit together in '69, and we remained very close throughout all the years. But how tough was it for Stephen? He lived essentially across the street from St. Augustine High School. So every day he had to walk past the St. Aug kids who didn't like the fact that his parents were sending him to Jesuit. And then when he got to Jesuit, he had to face the kind of the covert and sometimes overt racism that he had to face. The kids would pull the race cards on him. And he told me many years ago about some of the stunts that were pulled on him in the locker room and that he had to endure. So I asked him a few years ago, I said, how come you never told me about any of this stuff when we were going to school? He was always projecting such a happy demeanor. And he said, Pete, I just didn't want to bother you with it. This was something I had to deal with myself. So he did confide in a few teachers about his situation, and they were able to really come to his defense and help him. And Stephen never forgot that. Stephen has gone on to become a great surgeon. And my point is this: you never know in life what struggles someone is facing. So be there for someone else. As Father Thompson would say, be a but person. Father Thompson went on to establish the Rebuild Center for the homeless, Cafe Reconcile to help people get jobs in the hospitality industry, and the Good Shepherd Nativity School on Baronne Street, a free tuition school that is right now changing lives forever. That took every ounce of Father Harry's faith, passion, and vision, So I think now you understand why Father Harry was microwaving cash on a Monday morning. You know, he had a mission to attend to. Father Donald Hawkins, my English teacher at Jesuit, was one of my best friends. He died too young in 2014. He was an orthopedist's nightmare. He always had something wrong with his body, but his spirit was always soaring. Maybe it was because he suffered so much physical pain throughout his life that he developed a compassionate sense of what others were going through. A Jesuit graduate told me once at Father Hawkins' funeral that he had gotten a call out of the blue from Father Hawkins during the summer before his junior year. The students' parents had just separated, and Father Hawkins had found out about it, and he took an interest in the young man. He alerted the guidance department about the situation to let them know, and supported that student personally for the next 2 years. The student said he never forgot Father Hawkins and his compassion toward him. Don Hawkins was a man for others. After graduating from Loyola, I worked as a sports writer in New York from 80 to 92, and I worked most of my time in New York for the New York Post, which is one of the greatest tabloid newspapers in the whole world, okay? It's known for its crazy front pages and its headlines, the most iconic of which was in 1983, when a crime victim was found decapitated in a Queens nightclub, and the Post's famous headline was, "Headless Body in Topless Bar." And that was my newspaper. When Pope Benedict resigned as Pope in 2013, the middle of February, he said, "I'm going to resign at the end of the month." It was big news. So the Post put on its front page in big block letters, "Out of here," and it was an exclamation point. And at the bottom of the page it says, "Pope gives God 2 weeks' notice." So that was my paper. You're too young to remember Buddy Diliberto, okay? But I think your parents would know him. He was a Blue Jay who was a sports writer, and a really very good one. Later in life, Buddy became a TV sports anchor and a radio talk show host. He had a reputation for mangling the English language. One year, WWL Radio sponsored a radiothon to raise money for Children's Hospital. So Buddy dutifully went to Children's during the day to get some background on what to say later in the evening, to talk to his listeners about. And on the radio that night, I'll never forget this as long as I live, Buddy told his listeners, "I really got choked up walking down the halls and seeing all those kids hooked up to their RVs." My dad was actually present at Channel 8's TV studio one night when Buddy D elbowed him in the ribs. He said, "Watch out, Pete. Watch what I'm going to do after the commercial." The Saints had lost a ton of games in a row, okay? When Buddy came back from the break, he put a bag over his head, and instantly the Aints were born. My dad told Buddy, I said, "No one can understand you when they see your lips, and then when you put a bag over your head, absolutely nobody can understand what you're saying." Buddy did have PTSD, post-traumatic Saints disorder, but he vowed to wear a red dress down Bourbon Street if the Saints ever made it to the Super Bowl. Buddy died 5 years before the Saints reached the Promised Land, but he was so beloved on the Sunday before the Super Bowl in 2010, 30,000 men and women showed up in red dresses and paraded in the Buddy D Red Dress Parade into the French Quarter. Buddy actually was an authentic, genuine person who cared deeply for others. Not many people know that Buddy Diliberto attended daily mass at St. Rita Church in Harahan. He was a man for others. I love telling stories because I think they have the power to change hearts and really inspire souls. I know I got that passion from my dad. He was constantly smiling and he was always approachable. Every morning he would drive out to Metairie to the morning call, ain't there no more, I guess, and he would get his coffee and donuts and read his newspapers. Invariably, somebody would come up and sit next to him. One day I was with him and a man sat down and he was talking, "Hey, what do you think about the Saints, Pete?" You know, for 15 minutes this went on. My dad would just say, yeah, I follow you, I understand. After the guy left, I said, "Dad, who was that?" And he said, "I have absolutely no idea." So my dad was always thinking about people and a man for others. One of the great stories about my dad, which always stuck with me, when in the early 60s, when there was desegregation, and certainly in the South it was very difficult. the Picayune and the State Item decided to hire African-American sports writers to cover black college sports and black high school sports. R.L. Stockard, who worked for Southern University in New Orleans, was one of the guys. He covered the high schools, and then he would go to the paper on Lafayette Square, go up to the newsroom, find a typewriter as far away from the desk as possible, and kind of quietly type his story. Nobody interacted with him. R.L. told me one day, the day he got there, my dad went across the room to talk to him and said, "Hey, R.L., my name is Peter Finney. If I can ever do anything for you, just let me know." R.L. said until he was hired as a sports writer for the State's Item, the only African-American at the State's Item was a janitor. He said he never forgot my dad's kindness, toward him. So what's the lesson? Be a man for others. Go out of your way to be kind to someone who can't do anything for you. Brighten someone's day by listening. That's what Jesuit High School taught my dad, taught me, taught my sons, and taught you. As I mentioned, I spent 12 years in New York, and all 4 of our children were born there. I really had a great job. I met my dad at almost every major sporting event, the Masters, the U.S. Open, the Final Four, and he would bring up crawfish, and you try carrying that on a plane, these days. In '92, I was covering the Barcelona Olympics and covering the New York Knicks, and we added it up. I think in 1992, I was on the road 95 nights. We had 4 small children, and I'll never forget this. I was in Los Angeles one evening ordering room service, a prime rib, and I made a dangerous phone call back to my wife. "Hey, how's it going, honey?" And she said, "Oh, it's okay. I just got finished feeding the kids. Jonathan threw up, and I just shoveled the sidewalk off the snow." And so we decided really it was time to make a change in our lives. And even for a guy with husband hearing, that's when you hear every other word from your wife that you want to hear. I knew that we had to make a change. And that's how we came to the Clarion Herald. It's been such a great blessing to me and to my family. People say, "Do you miss sports writing?" I really don't. There was one little short story about a widow who had not been out of her house for like 5 years. She read about a group that helps grieving spouses go to a meeting. She read this in the Clarion Herald, went to the meeting, and it changed her life. She went down to the department store and bought a dress. She became a regular part of society. She ended her self-imposed imprisonment. Those are the kind of stories that are just incredibly important to write about. Ash Wednesday service for volunteers who were gutting a house in New Orleans East. There was one picture that said it all. There was a priest from Columbus, Ohio, who was placing ashes on teenage faces that were already smudged with the mold and dirt of another house they were resurrecting from the muck. So here are kids coming from all over and helping us. People often ask me if I knew Peter was going to be a priest, and I have to chuckle. When he was ordained at St. Louis Cathedral in 2010, my wife and I were the ones sitting in the second pew, and we needed a lot of assistance to remain, as the air flight attendants would say, to remain in a full upright and locked position. I think you could ask any parent of a priest or a religious if the seed of their child's vocation was planted in pristine soil with just the right amount of sun and water and fertilizer. I think that would not be correct. If we're totally honest, life is often a garden beset by weeds and rocks and drought. We all fall short, and my wife has been a rock of faith. Somehow, through all of our trials and errors, and maybe even because of the mistakes that we made, the Holy Spirit transmitted a spark that ignited a fire deep down in Peter's heart. So yes, God is good all the time. When we moved from New York back to New Orleans in '93, Peter was in the middle of 3rd grade. He was actually behind in learning how to write longhand. So every afternoon, Sister Joseph Francis, a sister of St. Joseph, would spend extra hours with him, teaching him how to write cursive and how to catch up. Peter always remarked how loving and patient she was with him. That was just more water for the seed of his vocation. Sister Joseph Francis was a woman for others. Being the father of a priest is an amazing experience. Quite often, I've got to just close my eyes because I really can't take it all in. At Peter's first Mass, Father Paul de Rogers had written the prayers of the faithful, and one of them went like this: "May the Finney family be blessed by Peter's priesthood." and absolutely nothing has been truer than that. I'm proud of all of our children. Our eldest daughter, Rebecca, served for 2 years as a volunteer teacher at a Catholic school in Haiti. Our youngest daughter, Sarah, is a guidance counselor at Dominican. And in a special way, Jonathan, who's now a doctor, has been a true warrior for his faith. When he was a freshman, he was very overtly religious, and he had to endure the bullying that he got from some of his classmates. But one of the reasons he became a doctor is because he was a personal care assistant for a young man in Baton Rouge who had cerebral palsy. Jonathan is a man for others. Father Raymond Fitzgerald was president in your early years at Jesuit. Father was 2 years younger than I. He was in the class of 1976. Many of you were pre-freshmen in January 2014 when Father Fitzgerald announced at a student assembly that he had Lou Gehrig's disease. And he made it clear in a very Ignatian way that the progressive illness had changed nothing in his life. How could he say that? The principle and foundation of St. Ignatius' spiritual exercises declare that, and I'm quoting here, man is created to praise, reverence, and serve God, and whether a person is healthy or not does not change his life's work. Father Raymond called it holy indifference. One can praise, reverence, and serve God in sickness or in health, in abundance or in need. When I spent 90 minutes with Father Raymond in Grand Coteau in August of 2016, just before his death, his arms, which had really given him the first signals in 2013 that something was wrong with his body, were at his side. It had become difficult for him to swallow. He was taking his meals through a feeding tube. His words came softly, but as always, they were SAT precise. When someone asked him if his regular stream of visitors, all of his former students and colleagues, was, quote, tiresome, he smiled and probably reflected on the vocabulary cards he once devoured as a scholar of English and Latin and Greek. And he said, they were tiring, but not tiresome. There's a difference between tiring and tiresome. I asked him about Ignatius' idea of holy indifference. He said, it's something I think about in my best moments. Of course, there is the other 99.9% of the time. We are created to praise, reverence, and serve God, and we can do that in any circumstance, as Christians have been doing for centuries in all points of life and in all manner of ways. He talked of remaining united in prayer with his Jesuit students, with you, the class of 2018, who would swim past him in the hallways every day. He said this, everything I have seen since I left Jesuit confirms that many of the students I'm in touch with who are now in college are really outstanding, holy young men. God has been very generous in his blessing, and I think in their hands, the present and the future of the church is in fine hands. The prayer most emblematic of St. Ignatius is the Suscipe, which is Latin for receive. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, my entire will, all I have and call my own. You've given all to me. To you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it what you will. Give me only your love and your grace. That's enough for me. Father Raymond Fitzgerald, your first president, was a man for others. My final story. The church is not just rules and regulations. It's stories of love and redemption and overcoming obstacles in life through our faith. After Katrina, St. Lawrence of Brindisi Parish in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles, a very poor area, raised $8,000 in a special collection for St. Gabriel Parish in New Orleans. On the Monday after the weekend masses, the money counters were opening the collection envelopes. A note was written on the outside of the envelope in Spanish. Quote, for the victims of the hurricane, I did not bring any money, but this should be of some value. It is with all my heart. When the money counters opened the envelope, they saw inside a woman's gold wedding ring with small notches on the outside. Be a man for others. God bless you all.